Brittney Griner saw Angel Reese arrive in Atlanta and almost immediately decided she'd seen enough. Within days, she was gone, not chasing a title, not joining a contender, but heading to the Connecticut Sun, a team near the bottom of the standings. Let that sink in. A future Hall of Fame center chose a struggling roster over staying in the same locker room as one teammate. And before walking out, Griner reportedly left Reese with some words that people around the league still haven't forgotten. The explanation behind her exit paints a very clear picture of what things might really be like inside those locker rooms, especially when you compare it to the energy around Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever. Stick with this, because it escalates quickly, and I want to hear your take. Do the Atlanta Dream actually move on from Angel Reese this season? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Now think about this. What kind of situation leads teammates to openly celebrate when someone gets traded? Because that's exactly the reaction inside Chicago when the Sky finally dealt Angel Reese to Atlanta, and they weren't exactly subtle about it. To understand how things reached that point, you have to go back to the beginning. When Reese first arrived in Chicago, there was real excitement. She came out of LSU with serious hype, and the organization believed her rebounding and physical presence could anchor a rebuilding team. On the stat sheet, she delivered, putting up huge rebounding numbers and earning all-star nods in both her rookie and sophomore seasons. On paper, it looked like Chicago had found its centerpiece. But once you looked beyond the numbers, the reality was a lot messier. The Sky went from 13 to 34 to 10 to 34 over those 2 seasons. Not only were they losing, they were trending in the wrong direction. Reese was positioned as the focal point, yet the team finished at the bottom both years, combining for just 23 wins against 61 losses. And while her rebounding total stood out, there was more to that story. A noticeable portion of those boards came off her own missed shots. Her struggles finishing around the rim became impossible to ignore, creating a stat line that looked dominant at first glance, but told a different story when you dug deeper. You can't build wins off rebounds if the misses are part of the problem. Still, the on-court issues weren't even the biggest concern. Behind the scenes, things unraveled quickly. Her relationship with teammates started to fracture, and it didn't stay private. After veteran Courtney Vandersloot went down with an injury, Reese reportedly referred to her as old and washed, a comment that doesn't just disappear in a professional locker room. Vandersloot is a respected veteran who earned her place in the league over years of work. Comments like that stick, and players don't forget them. Then there was Camila Cardoso, expected to form a strong frontcourt duo with Reese. At one point, she walked out during practice. When your own teammate can't even finish a session with you, that says a lot about the environment day to day. And when losses piled up, accountability became another issue. In post-game moments, Reese often shifted blame toward others, something teammates and staff absolutely notice, even if it's not always said out loud. Over time, those patterns add up. Eventually, it reached a breaking point. The Chicago Sky made the rare decision to suspend her for conduct detrimental to the team. That's not a minor move. It's one of the clearest signals a franchise can send that something behind the scenes has gone seriously wrong. After she was gone, the tone inside the organization couldn't have been clearer. Reports from Yahoo Sports quoted sources saying there was no love lost, and that people within the Sky were genuinely relieved to see her leave. Another insider didn't sugarcoat it either. Teammates had grown tired of the situation, and the move was necessary if the franchise wanted to move forward in a healthier way. That's not just one frustrated voice speaking out. That's an entire locker room sending a message. So this wasn't about tweaking the roster or finding a better basketball fit. Chicago didn't move Angel Reese because they had a strategic upgrade lined up. They moved her because things had reached a breaking point. 2 seasons filled with public criticism of teammates, internal tension, a suspension, and even a practice incident had created an environment that simply wasn't sustainable anymore. At some point, the front office decided the production just didn't outweigh the damage. Now shift to Atlanta, because they didn't just take a chance. They paid a serious price. 2 first-round picks and a second-round swap. That's what the Dream gave up for a player whose former team had just disciplined her and then openly moved on without hesitation. That kind of investment raises eyebrows immediately. And it feels even more questionable when you look at where Atlanta already was. This wasn't a rebuilding team looking for a spark. The Dream were coming off a 30-14 season in 2025, the best record in franchise history, and had already built a strong core with Brittney Griner, Brianna Jones, Alicia Gray, and Ryan Howard. This was a team that had real momentum and legitimate playoff expectations. Then the postseason hit, and everything fell apart. Despite that dominant regular season, Atlanta ran into the Indiana Fever in the first round and got knocked out. And here's the part that really stings. Indiana wasn't even at full strength. Caitlin Clark was out, and the Fever were dealing with multiple injuries. It was a golden opportunity, and Atlanta couldn't capitalize. So the front office had a choice: look inward and address execution issues, or make a bold roster move.
They chose the latter and landed on Angel Reese as the solution. But that decision comes with a lot of assumptions. You have to watch Chicago struggle for 2 straight seasons with Reese as a centerpiece and convince yourself the problem wasn't the fit. It was the situation. You have to believe that a team that lost due to execution gaps was missing someone whose biggest statistical strength comes with serious efficiency concerns. And you have to overlook a pattern of locker room tension, public incidents, and a suspension that raised red flags across the league. What Atlanta is essentially doing is swapping out Brittney Griner, a proven veteran, for Reese, while keeping most of the same core that just fell short against a weakened opponent, and calling it an upgrade. Fans haven't exactly been quiet about it either. The reaction online has ranged from confusion to outright frustration. The biggest concern? That the team replaced a respected veteran presence with a player whose teams haven't translated individual stats into wins. Now, to be fair, Griner's numbers in 2025 weren't eye-popping. She averaged 9.8 points and 5.2 rebounds, often coming off the bench in a system under head coach Carl Smesko that didn't fully play to her strengths. But focusing only on the stats misses the bigger picture. Griner is a 2-time WNBA champion. She brings experience, leadership, and credibility. Things that don't show up in the box score, but absolutely impact how a team operates. Veterans like that influence preparation, mindset, and how younger players handle pressure moments. That kind of presence can't just be replaced with raw numbers. And those draft picks Atlanta gave up? They could have been used to strengthen depth, add complementary pieces, or target someone who directly addresses the gaps exposed in that playoff loss. Instead, they're gone. And in return,
Atlanta gets a player tied to a 13-34 season, followed by a 10-34 season as a focal point. No matter how you break it down, the equation is tough to justify. Future assets gone, a respected veteran out, and now a locker room dynamic that comes with real question marks. And the most telling reaction didn't come from fans or analysts. It came from Brittney Griner herself. At the time of the trade, she was still under contract with Atlanta, healthy, valuable, a player any contender would want. No one forced her to make a move. Whatever decision she made next was entirely hers. And according to reports, her response was blunt and unmistakable. She labeled Angel Reese a toxic loser. This wasn't one of those polished, PR-friendly reactions where every word is carefully chosen. I said the reports that surfaced right after the trade painted a much sharper picture. Brittney Griner's response to Angel Reese joining Atlanta was described as blunt and unmistakable. She didn't believe anything would change just because Reese was wearing a different jersey. In her eyes, the issues that followed Reese in Chicago weren't tied to the city, they were tied to the player, and switching teams wasn't going to magically fix that. From what insiders suggested, Griner didn't need to wait and see how things played out. She had already seen enough to know how the story would likely end. So just 5 days after the Dream made the trade official, Griner made her move. And it wasn't to a contender, not to the Aces, not to the Lynx, not to any team with a clear path to a title. Oh, she signed with the Connecticut Sun, a team sitting near the very bottom of the standings. That decision speaks louder than any press conference ever could. Think about the perspective here. This is a player who returned to professional basketball after everything she's been through, a 2-time champion, a future Hall of Famer, and she looked at Atlanta's locker room situation and decided that was the tougher environment to deal with. Not a playoff rematch, not a grueling schedule, not adapting to a new system. It was the idea of sharing a locker room with Angel Reese. And it's not like Griner was guessing. The warning signs had been public for a while. Reese had taken shots at Courtney Vandersloot, calling her old and washed after an injury. Post-game interviews over 2 seasons showed a pattern of deflecting responsibility. Fine, there was the suspension, the practice incident involving Camila Cardoso walking out. And behind the scenes, reports described the atmosphere in Chicago as tense and exhausting. In a league as tight-knit as the WNBA, none of that stays hidden. Players talk, word travels cycles fast. Veterans especially pay attention to that kind of environment. So when that same situation essentially got transferred to Atlanta, Griner made sure she wasn't part of it. Tension between veterans and younger stars isn't anything new in this league. Big personalities and big expectations can clash. That's normal. Usually though, those issues stay internal and get worked through over time. But this wasn't handled quietly. Griner didn't request a discreet trade or release a generic statement about seeking a new challenge. She left within 5 days and chose one of the weakest teams in the league. The timing alone told the story. That's not subtle, that's a statement. Meanwhile, Reese's public image leans heavily on being unfazed, unbothered, immune to criticism. And that might play well online, but no amount of social media messaging changes what just happened in reality. A Hall of Fame caliber player evaluated her options and decided that being on a bottom tier team was preferable to staying in that locker room. That's not spin, that's a decision. And Atlanta felt the impact immediately. They gave up 2 first-round picks to make the deal, lost their veteran presence almost instantly, and the season hadn't even tipped off yet. Now flip over to Chicago, because this is where things get even more interesting. For 2 years, the Sky carried a reputation around the league. Free agents weren't eager to go there, veterans weren't lining up, and it felt more like a fallback destination than a place players truly wanted to be. That perception changed almost overnight after Reese was gone. The front office didn't waste time. They brought in Skylar Diggins-Smith on a 2-year deal, a 7-time All-Star known for her intensity and demand for accountability. She's not the type of player who joins a team just to coast. That move alone signaled a major shift in culture. Oh, and then they secured Azura Stevens on a 3-year deal worth around $1 million per season. A big who can stretch the floor and actually create space offensively. A completely different kind of fit. And it didn't stop there. Chicago traded for Rickea Jackson from the Sparks, giving up Ariel Atkins and a 2028 first-round pick swap. Jackson, a 6'2" forward, averaged 14.7 points last season and brings shot creation, something the team badly needed. That move was graded an A- by CBS Sports, which tells you how it was viewed around the league. Look at the pattern: proven talent, strong resumes, and players known for contributing to winning environments. And all of them committed to Chicago within weeks of Reese's departure. That's not random. And then came another telling move: the return of Courtney Vandersloot, on the same veteran Reese publicly criticized. Chicago didn't just bring her back, they made it clear she was still valued. That decision might have flown under the radar, but it said everything about which direction the organization chose to go. Now here's where things really sparked reactions. The Sky reassigned Reese's number 5 jersey to Rickea Jackson, and they didn't hesitate. No ceremony, no discussion, no symbolic pause. Jackson wore number 5 before, so Chicago gave it to her and moved forward. Reese fans weren't happy. Social media lit up with calls to retire the number. But let's be real, that kind of honor is usually reserved for players who win championships or spend years building a legacy with a franchise. Reese's time in Chicago ended after 2 losing seasons, a suspension, and a trade, and the organization made it clear they were ready to turn the page. That decision shows exactly how Chicago framed those 2 seasons in hindsight. Retiring that number would essentially mean honoring a 23-61 stretch in a locker room that by multiple accounts, players were eager to move on from. Instead, the organization made its stance obvious in the simplest way possible. No ceremony, no tribute, no reflection. Just handing the jersey to someone else and moving forward like that chapter had already been closed. And from the front office's perspective, it pretty much was. Fans online didn't miss the irony either. The same changes Angel Reese had been pushing for while she was still there only started happening after she left. Before the trade, she openly called for the Sky to bring in stronger talent around her. And ironically, that's exactly what Chicago did, but only once she was no longer part of the equation. Skylar Diggins-Smith didn't arrive during the turbulence. Rickea Jackson wasn't added in the middle of the drama. Azura Stevens didn't commit while the environment was unstable. Those moves came after the reset, when other players finally felt comfortable buying in. From a distance, teams were watching Chicago, and once the situation shifted, they responded quickly. Meanwhile, Atlanta looked at a first-round playoff exit and decided the solution was rebounding. That's the foundation of the Angel Reese move. The belief that her interior presence could push a 30-14 roster over the hump and get them past the opening round. But that only makes sense if you believe rebounding was the missing piece. The problem is that doesn't match what actually happened in that series. Look at Atlanta's roster before the trade. Alicia Gray was a proven scoring wing who could create her own shot. Ryan Howard was developing into a legitimate two-way threat. The team had depth, balance, and versatility across positions. And Brittney Griner brought championship experience, playoff composure, and veteran leadership that can't be measured in box scores. That's not a roster that collapsed because of rebounding. That's a roster that still got knocked out by an Indiana Fever team that wasn't even close to full strength. And Caitlin Clark was dealing with injuries, key rotation players were limited, and Indiana still managed to eliminate Atlanta in the first round. That points less to a physical mismatch and more to execution issues, late game decision making, composure, and playoff readiness. Those are not problems you solve by adding more rebound volume, and now Atlanta is essentially running it back with the same core, just swapping Griner out for Reese, and that comparison is where things get uncomfortable. Griner is a two-time champion, Reese hasn't played a single playoff game yet. Even in a down statistical year, Griner still brought credibility, structure, and championship habits that younger players absorb just by being around. That kind of presence doesn't show up in highlight clips. Reese, on the other hand, it comes with a very different resume, 2 straight losing seasons at the center of the roster, a suspension, and a trail of reported friction with teammates that followed her out of Chicago. Could Gray, Howard, and Reese form interesting combinations on paper? Sure, but Atlanta's playoff loss to Indiana wasn't about lineup creativity. It was about failing to close a series against a depleted opponent, and nothing in Reese's history directly addresses that issue. So the reality of the move is hard to ignore. Atlanta lost a first-round series it probably should have won, then responded by trading away 2 first-round picks and replacing a Hall of Fame veteran with a player tied to a 23-61 stretch across 2 seasons. And before training camp even begins, Brittney Griner is gone. Meanwhile, Indiana is only getting stronger. Caitlin Clark is heading into her 3rd season with a full offseason to prepare. Injured players are returning, and the Fever are likely to be even tougher in 2026 than the team that already eliminated Atlanta while shorthanded. Griner didn't leave because she was afraid of competition. According to reports, she had already seen how this story unfolded once in Chicago, and didn't feel like repeating it in a new environment. Chicago has already completely reshaped its roster in a single offseason. Atlanta, meanwhile, lost a Hall of Fame presence before even playing a game, and now finds itself tied to a player who, before turning 24, is already on her 2nd franchise amid the same concerns that followed her out of her first stop. At some point, the pattern doesn't change until the situation does. So the question now becomes simple. Does Atlanta stick with this direction, or does it eventually decide a reset is needed? What do you think? Does Angel Reese last the season in Atlanta? Let me know below.